She had nothing left, just the endless desert, and two children who could no longer cry because even their tears had dried up. What she didn't know was that an Apache warrior was about to change her fate and that of an entire tribe. The wind of the Sonoran Desert carried the bitter scent of injustice as Ellen Morgan took her 9-year-old son's hand and carried her 6-year-old daughter in her arms, walking away forever from what had been her home for a decade. Her bare feet sank into the hot earth, while tears dried instantly on her cheeks under the relentless midday sun of 1863 in the Arizona Territory. Just 3 days earlier, Ellen had been the respected wife of a prosperous merchant in the town of San Rafael. Her husband, David Morgan, had built a thriving business selling tools and supplies to miners flocking from all over the United States in search of fortune in the nearby mountains. Their adobe house with its red-tiled roof had been a haven of love and prosperity, where the aroma of fresh-baked bread mingled with the laughter of their 2 young children. But the Civil War had swept in like a devastating storm, taking everything Ellen cherished. David had been conscripted by the Union Army, promising he'd return in 6 months to celebrate their son Matt's birthday. Ellen had packed his warmest clothes, stuffed homemade remedies into his leather satchel, and wept silently as she watched him ride off on a borrowed horse, knowing deep down she might never see him again. The months dragged on like a slow river of worry and fleeting hope. Ellen kept the business running as best she could, selling off the remaining stock and caring for Matt and little Hope with the fierce determination of a mother protecting her cubs. Nights were the hardest when the children asked when Papa would return, and she had to spin tales of glorious battles and imminent victories, while inside her heart crumbled with anguish. The news arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a young soldier with sad eyes who could barely meet Ellen's gaze. David had died in a skirmish near Gettysburg, fighting bravely for his country. The soldier handed her the bronze medal that had belonged to her husband and a blood-stained letter where David declared his eternal love and begged her to be strong for the children. Ellen collapsed on the kitchen floor, clutching the medal to her chest, as a primal scream of pain escaped her throat. Matt ran to her, confused and scared, while little Hope cried without understanding why Mama had suddenly become so sad. In that moment, Ellen felt her soul split in two. One part had gone with David to wherever the dead go, and the other had to find a way to survive for her children. The troubles began immediately. Mr. Archibald Montgomery, the most powerful rancher in the region, appeared at her door 3 days after the funeral with legal papers and a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. He explained with false courtesy that David owed him a large sum from business loans, and the only way to settle the debt was to hand over the house and the store. Ellen protested desperately, showing the ledgers where all debts were marked paid, but Mr. Montgomery simply shrugged and pointed to the official seals on his documents. "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Morgan," he said in a honeyed voice dripping with lies, "but the law is the law. You have 3 days to vacate the property. You can take only what you can carry." His eyes roamed over Ellen's booty in a way that made her feel dirty, and he added with a repulsive grin, "Of course, if you'd like to discuss alternative arrangements, we could always find a solution that benefits us both." Ellen slammed the door in his face, but she knew she had no legal recourse. Corruption in the territorial courts was as common as dust on the trails. The day of eviction arrived like a death sentence. Ellen had packed what little she could carry, some clothes for the children, her grandmother's Bible, the few silver coins she'd managed to hide, and enough food for 3 days if rationed carefully. When Montgomery's men arrived to enforce the eviction, Matt clung to his mother's skirts, asking why they had to leave their home, while Hope sobbed without comprehending what was happening. "Let's go, children," Ellen whispered in a broken voice. "God will show us the way." But as she walked down the dusty path away from town, she had no idea where to direct her steps. She had no close family, no friends with enough resources to help, and the few dollars she carried wouldn't last a week. The first night they spent under a lone mesquite tree, huddled together as Ellen tried to keep the children warm with her shawl. Matt asked if they could go home the next day, and Ellen had to explain in simple words that they no longer had a home. Little Hope cried until she fell asleep from exhaustion, and Ellen stayed awake all night listening to the threatening sounds of the desert night and wondering how she'd ended up in this desperate situation. By the second day, they'd started walking north, hoping to reach some town where Ellen could find work as a seamstress or laundress. But the water ran out faster than she'd calculated, and by the third day the children could barely walk. Their lips were cracked, their eyes sunken from dehydration, and Ellen knew if she didn't find help soon, she'd lose them too. That's when the outlaws appeared. Three dirty men on skinny horses, with guns in their belts and looks that promised violence. Ellen clutched her children to her body as the leader dismounted and approached with a predatory smile. "What do we have here?" he asked in a raspy voice. "A lady lost with her little ones. Must have something valuable hidden to be traveling alone through these dangerous lands." His eyes fixed on the small pouch where Ellen kept her last coins, and she knew she was about to lose the only thing left for their survival. "Please," Ellen begged. "We're a homeless family. We have nothing of value." But the outlaw laughed cruelly and extended his hand, demanding the pouch. When Ellen resisted, the man shoved her violently, making her fall to the ground with Hope in her arms. Matt screamed and tried to defend his mother, but he was too small against armed men. Ellen closed her eyes, expecting the worst, when she heard the sound of hooves approaching rapidly. The outlaws turned in alarm, and in the ensuing confusion, Ellen managed to get up and run to nearby rocks with her children. From their hiding spot, she heard shouts, gunshots, and then an ominous silence that filled her with terror. For hours, they stayed hidden among the stones until hunger and thirst became unbearable. The children were weak, and Ellen knew they couldn't go on like this much longer. With her heart pounding like a war drum, she made the hardest decision of her life: to emerge from hiding and seek help, no matter from whom. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in golden and red hues, when Ellen stepped out from the rocks, carrying Hope and leading Matt by the hand. Her steps were uncertain, her strength nearly spent, but a desperate mother's determination kept her moving. In the distance, she could see the smoke of a campfire, and with no other options, she headed toward it, preparing to beg for her children's lives from whoever she found. She had no idea she was about to meet someone who would forever alter the course of her destiny. Someone whose warrior heart hid a compassion he himself didn't fully know. The silhouette that emerged from the golden light of dusk wasn't what Ellen had expected. Tall as a desert cedar, with skin bronzed by years of relentless sun and black hair cascading like a waterfall to his shoulders, the man who appeared before her carried the dignity of his Apache people etched in every line of his face. His dark eyes, deep as wells of ancestral wisdom, fixed on Ellen and her children with an intensity that made her tremble, not from fear, but from a strange sense of being evaluated by someone who could see straight into the soul. Nantan was 35 years old when fate placed this lost white woman in his path in the sacred territory his tribe called home. As an experienced warrior of the Mescalero Apaches, he'd learned to read the silent language of the desert, the flight of vultures indicating fresh carrion, the nearly invisible tracks revealing enemy passage, the subtle shift in the wind announcing sandstorms. But nothing in his training had prepared him to interpret the pure desperation he saw in the eyes of this woman holding a small girl to her chest, while a boy clung to her skirts with trembling fingers. Ellen felt the world stop when their gazes met. She'd heard terrible stories about the Apaches, whispered tales in town of fierce warriors who showed no mercy to white settlers. But the man before her didn't radiate the savage cruelty the stories described. In his eyes, she saw something entirely unexpected: curiosity mixed with what might have been compassion. With a voice cracked by thirst and despair, Ellen found the words that would change both their lives forever. "Help me," she murmured in clear English, her knees shaking from exhaustion. "We have nowhere to go." The words poured from her heart like a desperate prayer, carrying all the weight of her pain, her loss, and her fierce love for the little beings who depended entirely on her. Nantan stood still, surprised for several reasons. First, it was unusual to find a white family alone in Apache territory, especially a woman with small children. Second, she had spoken in perfect English, not the broken Spanish some Mexican settlers used. But what struck him most was the dignity in her plea. There was no arrogance in her voice, no racial superiority he'd come to expect from whites. Just a desperate mother asking for help to save her children. For long seconds that felt like eternities, Nantan studied the small family. The woman was young, perhaps 28, with brown hair that had lost its shine from days under the desert sun. Her dress, once of good quality, was now torn and stained with dust and sweat. But it was the children where Nantan saw the true urgency. The older boy, about 9, had lips cracked from dehydration, and his eyes seemed too large for his gaunt face. The little girl in her mother's arms was dangerously still, with the shallow breathing of someone on the brink of collapse. In Apache culture, children were considered sacred gifts from the spirits. No matter their tribe or race, a child in danger awakened protective instincts that transcended cultural differences. Nantan had lost his own wife and the child she carried in her womb during a U.S. Army raid 3 years ago. Seeing these little ones on the edge of death stirred something deep within him that he tried to keep buried. "How did you get here?" Nantan asked in fluent English, approaching slowly so as not to frighten the family further. His voice was deep but not threatening, tinged with an accent from years of contact with American traders. Ellen felt a spark of hope at his relatively gentle tone. "My husband died in the war," she explained quickly. "They took our home. We have no family. We've been walking for days without enough water." The words tumbled out, as if she feared he'd leave before she could explain her desperate situation. Nantan nodded slowly, recognizing a story he'd heard too many times. The Civil War had left many families shattered, and the powerful always exploited the chaos to steal from the weak. He looked again at the children, seeing how the older boy tried to stay brave despite his evident exhaustion. How the little girl clung instinctively to her mother, seeking protection Ellen could no longer provide. "My children will die if I don't get water soon," Ellen continued, her voice breaking completely. "I ask nothing for myself, but they're innocent. They're just children." Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving clean streaks on her dust-caked skin. "If you can't help us, at least tell me where I can find water." It was then that Matt, the 9-year-old boy, staggered and began to fall forward. Nantan moved with the speed of a jaguar, catching the child before he hit the rocky ground. Holding him, he could feel the boy's bones protruding through his skin, seeing the unmistakable signs of severe dehydration. If he didn't get immediate help, the boy wouldn't survive the night. Little Hope chose that moment to open her eyes and look directly at Nantan. There was no fear in her gaze, just the absolute trust of a child who still believed that adults could fix any problem. She smiled weakly and murmured, "Water," in a barely audible voice. That single word, spoken with such innocence and need, completely shattered the emotional defenses Nantan had built around his heart. In Apache culture, there was a sacred concept called Inda, meaning the moral obligation to protect the defenseless. It was more than tradition. It was a spiritual mandate connecting every warrior to the ancestors and the Great Spirit guiding their people. Nantan felt the weight of that mandate falling on his shoulders as he contemplated this broken family that had appeared in his path like a test from the spirits. "Come with me," he said finally, carrying Matt in one arm while gesturing toward the nearby hills. "There's water and food close by. You can rest tonight and decide what to do tomorrow." His voice was firm but gentle, like someone accustomed to making life or death decisions. Ellen felt her knees buckle with relief. "You're really going to help us?" she asked, almost unable to believe her desperate prayer had been answered. Nantan looked at her with those dark eyes that seemed to see beyond superficial differences. "The children need help now," he replied simply. "Everything else can wait." He began walking toward a barely visible trail among the rocks, moving with the silent grace of someone who knew every stone and plant in the territory. Ellen followed his steps, carrying hope and feeling as if she were walking in a dream. After days of absolute despair, she'd found help in the most unexpected place from the least expected person. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she had hope that her children might see another dawn. As they walked the winding trail up into the hills, Nantan reflected on the decision he'd just made. Bringing strangers into his tribe's sacred territory required explanations, and not all his people would be willing to accept whites in their refuge. But there was something about this woman and her children that awakened painful memories of his own loss and a fierce determination that this time he could save the lives that mattered. Fate had placed this family in his path for a reason he didn't yet fully understand. But Nantan had learned to trust the wisdom of the spirits. What had begun as a chance encounter in the desert was about to become a story of mutual transformation that would change everyone's lives in ways none could imagine. The Apache camp appeared before Ellen's eyes like a vision from legends. Hidden in a secret valley among red rock hills, The settlement stretched beside a crystal-clear stream running between cottonwoods and willows. The tippies of painted leather rose like giant flowers against the starry sky, while campfires flickered like fallen stars, creating an atmosphere of peace that dramatically contrasted with everything Ellen had heard about the savage Apaches. When Nantan appeared carrying a little mat, followed by Ellen with Hope in her arms, a deep silence fell over the camp. Warriors sharpening weapons by the fire stood slowly. Women preparing food stopped their tasks, and Apache children, playing among the lodges, hid behind their mothers. The tension was so thick, Ellen could feel it pressing against her chest like an invisible hand. Amma, the elderly medicine woman of the tribe and Nantan's spiritual grandmother, emerged from her teepee with the dignity of a queen. Her snow-white hair framed a face etched by decades of wisdom and loss, and her black eyes shone with an intelligence that had seen 3 generations born and die. When she saw the strangers Nantan had brought, her expression hardened like desert stone. "What does this mean, grandson of my heart?" she asked in Apache, her voice resonating with the authority that had guided the tribe through countless crises. "Why do you bring white eyes to our sacred place? Have you forgotten how many of our brothers have died because of their kind?" Nantan gently placed Matt on a blanket by the main fire and stood tall to face his adoptive grandmother's challenge. "Wise grandmother," he replied in English, so Ellen could understand, showing respect, but also determination. "These children are dying, their stomachs are empty, their lips dry as the desert in drought. Since when do Apaches close our hearts to little ones who suffer?" A murmur of disapproval ran among the younger warriors. Dakota, Nantan's cousin, known for his hostility toward whites after losing his brother in a U.S. cavalry ambush, stepped forward with clenched fists. "This is betrayal," he declared, his voice laden with anger. "How long before this woman leads soldiers to our refuge? How many of our children must die for your misguided compassion?" Ellen felt the weight of all the hostile stares, but instead of shrinking in fear, something inside her hardened with determination. She'd lost too much and come too far to let prejudice condemn her children. With Hope still in her arms, she approached Amma and knelt on the earth, a gesture of respect she'd learned from observing native workers in her former life. "Wise elder," she said in English, hoping someone would translate. "I come not as an enemy. I come as a mother who has lost everything except her children. I don't know your customs. I don't know your rituals, but I know how to recognize kindness when I see it." She pointed toward Nantan. "This man saved my little ones' lives when no one else in the world would have bothered to help us. If that doesn't speak to the honor of your people, then I don't understand what honor is." Emma studied Ellen for long moments, reading the sincerity in her posture and words that white men's stories rarely showed. Finally, she approached the children and examined them with decades of wisdom, treating sick little ones. She touched Matt's feverish forehead, observed Hope's cracked lips, and saw in their eyes the same innocence that shone in Apache children's. "One night," she declared finally, her voice cutting through the rising protests, "the children may stay one night to regain strength. Tomorrow, we decide what to do with them." It was a minimal concession, but in the context of the surrounding hostility, it felt like a miracle. The following hours were a delicate dance of cultural survival. Ellen watched as the Apache women prepared a medicinal soup with desert herbs to strengthen her children, mentally noting each ingredient and technique. When Itzel, a young Apache mother, offered her a bowl of steaming broth, Ellen noticed the woman's hands trembling slightly from fever. Without thinking twice, Ellen approached and gently touched Itzel's forehead. "You have a fever," she observed with genuine concern. "In my town, we use cold compresses and willow tea to bring it down. May I help you?" Itzel instinctively backed away, but her illness had weakened her enough to accept help from any source. Ellen sought permission from Amma with a glance, and receiving a cautious nod, began preparing the compresses with the same dedication she would show treating her own children. As Ellen worked, Nantan watched from a distance with a mix of admiration and surprise. Most whites he'd known showed disgust or fear toward Apaches. But this woman treated Itzel with the same tenderness she would a member of her own family. Her movements were precise and gentle, whispering comforting words as she applied the compresses and brewed the medicinal tea. By midnight, Itzel's fever had dropped significantly. The young Apache woman took Ellen's hand and murmured, "Thank you," in broken English, with tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. It was a small moment, but laden with meaning that didn't go unnoticed by the other tribe members. At dawn the next day, Ellen awoke to find Matt sitting by the stream, chatting animatedly with several Apache children in a mix of English and gestures. His color had returned, his eyes sparkled with renewed life, and he was laughing for the first time in weeks. Hope was crawling among the women preparing breakfast, being pampered and fed by mothers who saw in her the reflection of their own daughters. They adapt quickly, Nantan observed, appearing silently beside Ellen as was his custom. Children don't see the differences that divide adults. Ellen nodded, watching as her older son tried to mimic the children's movements while playing at being hunter warriors. Matt never had the chance to play like this, she admitted. In town, he always had to behave like a little gentleman. Here, he can just be a boy. Over the days that followed, because one night turned into 3, then a week, Ellen began to find her place in the Apache community. She discovered her sewing skills were highly valued when she repaired a wind-damaged tipi with stitches so precise it made it stronger than before. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs, inherited from her grandmother who was a frontier healer, complemented the traditional wisdom perfectly. But it was her genuine willingness to learn that truly earned the tribe's respect. Ellen watched how the women tanned hides until she mastered the technique, helped gather medicinal plants until she could identify them by instinct, and joined communal tasks with a humility that dramatically contrasted with the arrogance Apaches had come to expect from whites. Nantan became her silent guide, teaching her the subtleties of desert survival. He showed her how to find water by following bird flights, identify edible plants amid seemingly hostile vegetation, and read the sky signs to predict weather changes. During these lessons, Ellen discovered Nantan was not just a fierce warrior, but a man of deep wisdom and sensitivity. "Why do you help me so much?" she asked one afternoon while he taught her to prepare pemmican, the concentrated food Apaches carried on long journeys. Nantan stayed silent for several minutes, contemplating the horizon where mountains met the infinite sky. "3 years ago, I lost my wife and the child she carried," he said finally, his voice heavy with old pain. "They died when U.S. soldiers attacked our winter camp. For a long time, I believed the spirits were punishing me for some forgotten sin." Ellen felt her heart constrict with compassion. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, gently touching his arm in consolation. "When I found you and your children in the desert," Nantan continued, "I saw a chance to honor my family's memory by saving yours. Maybe the spirits weren't punishing me. Maybe they were preparing me for this moment." The words created a deep connection between them, an understanding that transcended cultural and racial differences. Ellen began to see Nantan not as the savage the stories described, but as a man of honor who'd suffered losses as devastating as her own. One night, as stars shone like diamonds in the clear desert sky, Ellen found herself sitting by the communal fire, watching Matt and Hope sleep peacefully on buffalo hides the Apache mothers had prepared for them. For the first time in months, her children had full bellies, clean bodies, and the security of being protected by a community that had learned to value them. Amma approached and sat beside her with the dignified grace of one who'd earned the right to speak with authority. "You've changed much since you arrived," the elderly medicine woman observed. "You no longer have the eyes of someone who's lost hope." Ellen reflected on the elder's words. It was true that something fundamental had changed in her during these weeks among the Apaches. She'd lost the softness of hands that never worked hard, but gained the strength that comes from knowing oneself useful. She'd lost the paleness of indoor living, but gained the vitality from harmony with nature. "This place has taught me who I really am," Ellen responded honestly. "In my old life, my worth depended on my appearance, on being a decorative wife. Here, I've learned my true value is in what I can do for others." Amma nodded wisely. "The desert has the power to burn away all that's false within us, leaving only the essential. You've allowed that to happen, and that's why you've found your true strength." That night, Ellen fell asleep knowing she'd found more than temporary refuge. She'd found a chosen family, renewed purpose, and the possibility of a future she'd never imagined. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time since David's death, she felt ready to face them. The sound of hooves approaching at dawn sliced the morning air like knives, rousing the Apache camp with the urgency of a war alarm. Nantan leaped from his lodge with jaguar speed, his warrior instincts instantly alert. as he scanned the horizon for the danger source. What he saw chilled his blood. A column of U.S. cavalry soldiers approached through the valley, their blue uniforms standing out against the red rock like ink stains on clean parchment. "Soldiers!" he shouted in Apache, his voice echoing through the camp like a lion's roar protecting its pride. Immediately, the settlement transformed into an organized anthill of activity. Women quickly packed essential belongings while warriors ran to their weapons, and children were gathered in the camp's center under the elders' protection. Ellen awoke with her heart pounding like a war drum. Instantly aware something terrible was happening, she hugged Hope to her chest as Matt drew near, with eyes full of the fear he'd learned during their flight days. "What's happening, Mama?" he asked in a trembling voice. Amma appeared beside her with the urgency of someone accustomed to life-or-death crises. "Soldiers are coming this way," she explained quickly. "Likely hunting Apache fugitives, but if they find you here," she left the sentence unfinished. But Ellen understood the implications perfectly. The reality hit Ellen like a punch to the gut. Her presence had endangered the entire tribe that had welcomed her generously. If the soldiers found her living among the Apaches, they could use it as an excuse to attack the camp, arrest the warriors, or scatter the families. All the love and protection she'd found here could turn to tragedy because of her. "I have to leave," Ellen declared, starting to gather her few belongings. "I can't let them hurt these people because of me." Her hands shook as she tried to dress her children quickly, but Nantan appeared beside her with an expression that brooked no argument. "You're not going anywhere," he stated firmly, placing his hands on Ellen's shoulders. "This tribe doesn't abandon its own when danger comes. You're part of our family now, and families protect each other." Dakota approached running, his face tense with urgency. "At least 20 soldiers," he reported to Nantan, "coming straight for the camp. They're not scouting randomly. Someone gave them specific information about our location." The words fell like stones into still water. Ellen felt the world reel beneath her feet as a horrible realization took shape in her mind. "Mr. Montgomery," she murmured in a broken voice. "The man who took our home. He has connections in the army. He might have—" "What are you saying?" Nantan asked, studying the growing horror on Ellen's face. Ellen sank onto a rock, feeling all strength leave her. "There's something I haven't told you," she confessed in a shaky voice. "David, my husband, didn't die just fighting in the war. Before leaving, he discovered Mr. Montgomery was selling arms to Confederate rebels while informing their movements to the Union Army." The entire camp seemed to fall silent as Ellen continued her confession. "Mr. Montgomery knew David had evidence that could ruin him. That's why he sent him to the most dangerous battle, hoping he'd die. And when that wasn't enough, he invented false debts to take everything and ensure I couldn't speak." Nantan felt a cold fury spread through his veins. "You're saying this man not only destroyed your family, but now endangers mine?" "Probably offered a reward for information on a white woman with 2 children, Ellen continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Someone must have told him I was seen with you. Now he's coming to make sure I can never reveal what I know about his treason." Amma approached with the authority of decades guiding her people through crises. "Do you have proof of what you say?" she asked directly. Ellen nodded, reaching for the small sewing kit she had kept as one of her few treasures. With trembling fingers, she opened a secret compartment and pulled out several folded, stained documents. David hid these letters before going to war. They're correspondences between Mr. Montgomery and rebel leaders signed by him. There are also records of payments from the Union Army for information on rebel movements. The documents passed from hand to hand among the tribe's leaders. Though not all could read English fluently, those who could recognized their importance immediately. They were evidence enough to destroy one of the region's most powerful men, but also a death sentence for anyone possessing them. "This changes everything," Dakota murmured, studying the documents with new understanding. "They're not coming just for Ellen. They're coming to eliminate dangerous witnesses, and that includes all of us now." Nantan began formulating a plan with the tactical precision honed from years of warfare. "The soldiers expect to find a defenseless woman hidden among Apaches, protecting her out of compassion," he said, his voice taking on the command tone he used in battle. "They won't expect organized resistance from someone who knows their secrets." "What do you propose?" Amma asked, recognizing the strategic gleam in her adoptive grandson's eyes. Ellen is right about one thing, Nantan replied. She has to leave the camp, but not as a fugitive. She's going straight to higher authorities in the territorial capital, with that proof, escorted by Apache warriors who'll testify to the corruption they have witnessed. Ellen felt a mix of terror and admiration at the plan's boldness. Do you think it'll work? It'll work because it's the truth, Nantan said with iron conviction. And because Mr. Montgomery made the mistake of attacking our tribe. Apaches don't forget offenses or forgive those who harm our families. The soldiers arrived at the camp at noon, expecting minimal resistance. Instead, they found a full ceremonial reception. Nantan had organized the tribe in traditional welcome formation, with warriors on both sides of the main path and women and children forming a protective circle around the central fire. The cavalry captain, an older man with a gray mustache and hard eyes, dismounted with the arrogance of one expecting immediate obedience. I'm Captain Herrera, he declared in English. I'm looking for a white woman with 2 children. We have information she's being held in this camp against her will. Nantan stepped forward with the dignity of a tribal chief, though he technically wasn't one. I'm Nantan of the Mescalero Apaches, he replied in perfect English. No one in this camp is here against their will. All who are with us have chosen to be here. I didn't come to discuss philosophy with savages, the captain replied with contempt. I'm going to search this camp, and if I find the woman, I'm taking her. If there's resistance, you'll all be arrested as accomplices to kidnapping. That's when Ellen emerged from the main tipi, dressed in Apache clothing, but walking with the aristocratic dignity inherited from her high society upbringing. Her children flanked her. No longer the malnourished, terrified kids who'd arrived weeks ago, but strong, healthy little ones, radiating the confidence of those who know they're loved and protected. Captain Herrera, Ellen said in a clear voice that echoed through the camp. My name is Ellen Morgan, formerly of the Vasquez de Coronado line, and I have vital information that must reach higher authorities about treason and corruption threatening the United States. The captain studied her with evident surprise. This wasn't the terrified victim he'd expected. Ma'am, I've received specific orders to escort you back to civilization for your own protection. Orders from whom? Ellen asked, though she already knew the answer. From Mr. Archibald Montgomery, who's concerned for your welfare after your terrible ordeal. Ellen smiled with a mix of sadness and determination that made several soldiers exchange uneasy glances. Captain, what I'm about to show you will completely change your understanding of this situation, and I hope you're a man of honor who puts America's good above powerful men's interests. With deliberate movements, Ellen produced the documents that had remained hidden for so long. These papers prove Mr. Archibald Montgomery is guilty of treason against the Union, selling arms to Confederate rebels while betraying them to the Federal Army. My husband died because he discovered this conspiracy. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the wind whispering among the rocks. Captain Herrera, despite his initial arrogance, was fundamentally an honorable soldier who dedicated his life to serving the Union. As he read the documents Ellen handed him, his expression shifted from skepticism to absolute shock. If this is true, he murmured, studying the signatures and seals that clearly marked the correspondence as authentic. It is true, Ellen confirmed, and I'm willing to testify before any military tribunal about what I know, but I won't return to Mr. Montgomery to be silenced before justice can be served. The captain found himself in an impossible position. His orders were clear, but the evidence before him suggested he'd been manipulated into a criminal conspiracy. He looked at Ellen, then at the Apaches surrounding her protectively, and finally at the documents that could shift the power balance in the entire territory. The decision he made in the next minutes would determine not only Ellen and her children's fate, but also the future of the Apache tribe that had risked everything to protect a family of strangers who'd become chosen family. Captain Herrera stood motionless for what seemed like eternities, holding the documents Ellen had given him while his soldier's mind processed the implications. His years of military service had taught him to recognize authentic papers, and the proof of treason he was reading was undeniable. Finally, he raised his gaze to Ellen with an expression that had completely changed from hostility to respect. Mrs. Morgan, he said gravely, if these documents are authentic, and everything indicates they are, then you're not a fugitive needing rescue. You're a key witness in a treason case that could reach the highest government levels." He paused, studying the Apaches surrounding Ellen protectively. "And it seems you've found allies willing to give their lives to protect the truth." Nantan stepped forward with iron dignity. "My people don't make decisions lightly about whom to protect," he declared solemnly. "Ellen Morgan came to us as a desperate mother begging help for her children. She's earned our respect through her actions, her courage, and her dedication to our welfare. If anyone wants to harm her, they'll have to face all of us." Ellen had been listening with a mix of hope and terror, but now found her voice with surprising clarity. "Captain, I've spent the last weeks living among these noble people, learning that true worth doesn't come from power or wealth, but from the courage to do right no matter the personal cost." She stood tall with her developed dignity. "I'm willing to testify about what I know, but I won't abandon the family that saved my life." Ama approached with the authority of decades guiding her people. "Captain," she said in carefully pronounced English, "in our culture, when someone becomes family, that bond is sacred. Ellen and her children are now part of our tribe. Any plan must respect that reality." The captain found himself in a completely unexpected situation. He'd come expecting a simple rescue mission, but stumbled into a complex web of loyalties, justice, and valor that challenged all his preconceptions. After several minutes of intense reflection, he made a decision that would alter all future events. "I propose a solution," he declared finally. "I'll personally escort Mrs. Morgan to the territorial capital so she can present her testimony to the proper authorities, but not as a forced rescue, as voluntary protection for a key witness." He looked directly at Nantan. "And I extend an official invitation for representatives of your tribe to accompany us as additional witnesses." The proposal fell over the camp like blessed rain in the desert. It was more than anyone had hoped. Not only would Ellen have the chance to seek justice, but the Apaches would be officially recognized as allies. Nantan exchanged meaningful glances with Amma and the other tribal leaders. In their eyes, Ellen could see the silent communication she'd learned to recognize. Finally, Nantan nodded. "I accept to accompany Ellen to the capital," he declared solemnly. "But there are conditions that must be respected." The conditions were negotiated with mutual honor. Ellen would have freedom to return once the legal matter was resolved. The tribe wouldn't be harassed for providing refuge, and Ellen would speak directly to higher authorities without compromised intermediaries. Ellen felt her heart divide. On one hand, she knew she had to seek justice for David. On the other, the idea of leaving the place where she'd found peace and purpose filled her with deep sadness. She looked at Matt and Hope, who'd blossomed so much among the Apaches. "Mama," Matt murmured, taking her hand with surprising wisdom, "we're coming back hereafter." Ellen knelt to his level. "If all goes well, my son, and if the Apaches allow us to return, then yes, this is our home now." The words came from her heart with conviction that surprised her. Nantan approached and gently placed his hand on Ellen's wide shoulder. "The spirits brought you to us for a reason," he murmured in a voice only she could hear. "Maybe it was to prepare you for this moment, to find the courage needed to seek justice." He paused, his dark eyes shining with growing emotion. "Or maybe the reason was that we both needed to heal wounds we couldn't mend alone." Ellen felt tears of gratitude stream down her cheeks. "Nantan," she whispered, "what we've built here won't disappear because we have to face the outside world." He interrupted her gently, touching her face with infinite tenderness. "True love knows no borders of race, culture, or circumstance. What we've found is stronger than any obstacle." The journey to the capital took 2 weeks, during which Ellen shared stories of frontier life with the soldiers, weaving in tales of stagecoach adventures and cowboy legends to bridge the gap between worlds. When they arrived, Ellen's testimony caused a scandal that echoed from power halls to the humblest saloons. The documents were irrefutable, and her testimony, backed by Captain Herrera and Nantan, painted a devastating picture of corruption that had cost American lives. Mr. Archibald Montgomery was arrested in an operation involving federal marshals. His ranches were seized, his accomplices prosecuted, and his corruption network dismantled completely. For Ellen, seeing the fall of the man who'd destroyed her old life was satisfying, but more important was the official recognition the Apache tribe received. The government established a formal treaty guaranteeing the Mescaleros territorial rights and acknowledging their contribution to exposing the treason. Nantan was officially named ambassador for his people, a title he carried with the pride of one who'd fought his whole life for his people's dignity. 6 months after the day Ellen Paul had pleaded, "Help me, we have nowhere to go," to an Apache warrior in the desert, she stood in the same secret valley, dressed in ceremonial clothes for her traditional wedding to Nantan. The ceremony blended elements from both cultures. Christian prayers in English mixed with Apache blessings, creating a unique celebration like the love it was honoring. Matt, now fully bilingual, served as ring bearer with rings Ellen had made from silver, reclaimed from Montgomery's confiscated properties. Hope turned into a little Apache with decorated braids, scattered desert flower petals as her mother and new father exchanged vows, promising love and respect for each other's cultures. Amma, officiating the ceremony, spoke of how spirits use the most devastating tragedies to create unexpected blessings. Ellen came to us broken and lost, she declared, her voice resonating through the valley. But broken hearts, when healed properly, become stronger. She and Nantan have found in their shared wounds the foundation for a legendary love. 2 years later, Ellen held a daughter in her arms who would be raised knowing multiple cultures. The girl, named Itzel, would grow as a living bridge between worlds divided for centuries. In golden afternoons, Ellen sat beside Nantan, watching their children play in perfect multicultural harmony, now including games inspired by cowboy tales she'd shared, like roping imaginary calves or staging mock gunfights with sticks. "Did you ever imagine how your life would be if you hadn't found my family that day?" she asked him. Nantan contemplated the prosperous camp before them, now expanded with a small trading post, where Apaches bartered with passing settlers under peaceful terms. "I can't imagine that life," he replied, "because without you, there'd be no real life to imagine. When I heard your words, 'Help me, we have nowhere to go,' I thought I was saving a lost family. I didn't know I was the one lost, and you were going to save me." Ellen smiled, remembering the desperate woman who'd begged a stranger for help. That woman had believed she had nothing to offer. She hadn't known she carried the capacity to heal divided cultures and broken hearts, even inspiring the tribe to adopt some Western innovations, like improved irrigation from frontier farming techniques she'd taught. As stars appeared in the infinite sky, Ellen lifted her baby girl, watching as Itzel reached her tiny hands toward the celestial lights. In those eyes combining Apache depth with American determination, Ellen saw the future. Generations that would grow seeing diversity as wealth. The story that began with a desperate plea had transformed into a saga of love, justice, and creating a new family transcending all barriers, enriched by the spirit of the American West, where outlaws roamed, pioneers persevered, and unlikely alliances forged legends. It was a living testament that the greatest miracles are born from moments of deepest despair when the human heart opens fully to transformation. As the stars twinkled like distant campfires in the vast night sky of the American West, Ellen and Nantan sat together on a rocky outcrop overlooking their thriving valley. Their children, Matt, Hope, and little Itzel, played nearby, their laughter echoing like the calls of wild mustangs, blending the free-spirited games of cowboys and Apache hunters into one harmonious adventure. The camp had grown not just in size with its new trading post where settlers and tribesfolk exchanged goods under flags of peace, but in spirit, a beacon of unity in a land once torn by division and hardship. Ellen turned to Nantan, her hand resting on his, feeling the warmth of a love forged in the fires of loss and reborn in the desert's unyielding embrace. "We've come so far," she whispered. "From that day I begged for help in the wilderness, thinking all was lost. But look at us now, a family that bridges worlds, proving that even in the harshest frontiers, hope can take root and flourish." Nantan nodded, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of his ancestors and the resilience of pioneers who tamed the wild. "The spirits, and perhaps the God you speak of, wove our paths together not by chance, but to show that true strength lies in opening our hearts to the unknown. We lost much, but gained everything. A love that defies borders, a community that honors differences, and children who will carry forward a legacy of harmony." In that moment, as the wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying scents of pine and distant rain, Ellen realized the profound lesson etched into their story. Life in the American West, with its rugged trails, outlaw shadows, and golden horizons, teaches us that despair is not the end. It's the spark for transformation. When we face the unknown with courage, embrace those different from us, and fight for justice against the corrupt and the cruel, we don't just survive, we create legends that inspire generations. It's a reminder that every pioneer, every warrior, every soul wandering the vast plains has the power to heal wounds, build bridges, and turn tragedy into triumph. No matter how dry the desert or dark the night, one act of compassion can change destinies, igniting a fire that warms not just one heart, but an entire people. And so, dear listeners, as we ride off into the sunset of this mythic tale, let it linger in your soul like the echo of a cowboy's ballad. What bridges can you build in your own life? What acts of kindness might rewrite your story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time when an unexpected alliance changed everything for you. If this story of love, justice, and frontier spirit moved you, hit that like button to spread the inspiration and subscribe to Mythic West Stories or for more epic adventures from the untamed heart of America. Together we'll keep the legends alive. Until next time, keep riding toward the horizon.